For more perspective on the US-Wales finishing in a 1-1 draw, let's bring in our good friend who's back in Bristol, Connecticut, Kasey Keller, a veteran of many World Cups with the U.S. men's national team. Kasey, great to have you with us. Let's just get your opening thoughts on the game. What'd you make of the performance and the draw from the U.S.?
Well, I think you guys alluded to it really well. Is you know, you start hitting cliches, right? And you start talking about, you know, a game of two halves, but then you wonder, why was it a game of two halves? And there's another cliche that people talk about, and it's called match fitness. And the U.S., and you talked about several players, Weston being one of them, Weah being one of them, Dest being one of them, McKinney being one of them, who really, and you can probably throw Pulisic in that as well, a lack of match fitness. They did a really great job of pressing Wales higher up the field, maybe not from the initial, probably from the initial entry pass in the midfield. They won every second ball in midfield that first half. Wales couldn't get out of their own half, and when they did, it was simply to hit a ball further up the field, give possession back to the U.S. Well, the U.S. looked like they started to run out of gas, and they couldn't put that pressure higher up the field. Because they couldn't put that pressure higher up the field, and because of the adjustments bringing in Kiefer Moore, where you have a player that was then holding the ball up, which was non-existent in the first half for Wales, then the U.S. had to start running without the ball when they're already lacking match fitness for 4 or 5 guys on the pitch. And there's the one other thing about playing in a World Cup. The emotion of the first 20, 30 minutes. And you're running on adrenaline. And things are going crazy. You're 1-0 up. You have these delusions of grandeur. You come in at halftime. The team that you're playing against, for some reason, I have no idea why Wales didn't show up the first half. Now, we can have all those excuses as well. Haven't been in a World Cup in over 60 years. Maybe the occasion of being back in the World Cup that first half. Guys were nervous. They were a little bit just overawed. And then at halftime, they said to themselves, why are we playing like this? We're all Premier League players. We're better than this. And then they showed that they're better than this, and the U.S. just weren't able to respond. In the end, a lot of us thought it was going to be a 1-1 draw simply because Wales are a tough team to play against. They don't concede a lot of goals. The U.S., we know, don't have that marquee goal scorer. So you're looking at that going, where are the goals from the U.S. going to come by? And exactly what you guys talked about. Gareth Bale, who was non-existent for the majority of the game, wins a penalty, scores it, and does what he needed to do to be on that pitch.
Case, you spoke about that match fitness. How much of that is match fitness, and how much of that can we attribute to like maybe that team psyche, that mentality, and it being shaken in that second half?
But you can't get match fitness without playing matches. That's why it's called match fitness. You can't replicate the energy of a match that matters in a training session. And we just have too many guys, for whatever reason, either injured or maybe not in their side at the moment. And then you're asking them in a week's notice to give me that match fitness. Now, we all know those rare specimens that it doesn't matter. They can work harder than anybody else on the field. And look, Anthony Robinson is one of those guys, but he's also playing week in and week out for Fulham. So, but it's really difficult to ask guys to get to that level when they've really struggled with injuries over the last couple months and have worked really hard to get themselves fit to be on the pitch. But it's asking a lot when a team like Wales then changes what they're doing, start holding the ball up a little better, start connecting passes in midfield, and now you've had it completely your way for 45 minutes. And you know how much easier it is, Herc, to run with the ball than it is without the ball. And you just had 45 minutes where you got to run unopposed with the ball. Now all of a sudden you're 20 minutes into the second half and you've barely touched the ball and you're working without it, and you're starting to look over at the bench going, hey Greg, maybe it's time for me to come off.
All right, speaking of Greg, why don't we take a look at Greg Berhalter's starting lineup in this game, because I want to go over some of the big lineup choices that he had to make as a manager, and I think there's probably not one that we've talked about more on this show than the number 9. Today he goes with Josh Sargent. Kasey, how did you feel about Josh Sargent's performance in this match?
I thought Josh did what I expected from Josh. He was going to work hard, and a shame that the header in the first half just glanced off the outside of the post. I would have loved to have seen that at least be on target. The stuff that always kind of confuses me a little bit is, Josh was really far on the outside looking in during qualifying. And somehow he goes from the Premier League, where he's not involved, to getting relegated to the Championship and then starts in the first game of the World Cup. I'd also say a similar thing. I thought Tim Ream had a fantastic game. But how do you go from not being on the team unless somebody gets injured to then being the last one involved and then starting in the first game? If you were so good that you were going to start the first game, how were you not in the team from the outset? So, yeah, those are some of the questions I would have for Greg if we were sitting down after this and hanging out like we do often. That I would ask him, where were those thought processes on that? In that you have enough confidence to start Tim Ream, but you weren't even going to have him on the team.
Yeah, I agree with the assessment of Josh Sargent. I thought he was fine. I thought
just fine. That doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement.
You have to factor in the whole game, not just the first half. Everybody was good in the first half. Josh Sargent was holding up the ball very well in the first half. His runs were crisp in the first half. He looked dangerous in the first half. And I expected Josh Sargent to play this game. Just talking to Greg Berhalter and the profile of player he was looking for, it depended on the opponent. He said it himself. Josh plays against this type of opponent in the Championship. He's played against this type of opponent in the Premier League. I thought he did fine, but I'm with Kasey here. It's very difficult to go from not being part of this team to all of a sudden starting the very first game of a World Cup.
Kasey, let's get your thoughts on Matt Turner. He obviously gets the start today. Not a lot of action, not a lot he could have done on the penalty, but what'd you think of his game?
Yeah, I think for the most part it was solid. Obviously a couple crosses there. Kiefer Moore had a dunk that he missed, over the bar, which was very similar to Holland's goal against Senegal, where he got kind of caught in decision, and then the big man got in front of him and got fortunate that it was, flicked over the crossbar. And I think that's going to be something that, England's going to be looking at and going to be saying, let's put a lot of crosses on top of this guy. There's one thing when you make that move, from MLS to England, one of the biggest differences is the quality of crosses and the consistency, the way they're whipped in, and then how the split-second decision-making has to be made for you to come out or not come out. And, Matt, I know, great shot stopper. I like the way he read the ball. I would have loved to have seen him head that ball a little bit wider and not force Kellen Acosta into having to take a yellow card in the hope that for Wales that Gareth Bale could hit the midfield bomb. But I think it was decent, but he could improve.
All right, one last thing for you here, Kasey. How do you think the U.S. then, having seen what England did today against Iran, putting up those 6 goals in the 6-2 win, how does this U.S. team, now with a point in the bag, approach that game against England? Because I think there's probably some U.S. fans that are pretty worried that could get out of hand. And if you're 0-1-1, that's not a good spot to be after 2 games.
Well, it's going to be a little different because obviously that first half, and I think we all assumed in that first half that the U.S. was going to have a lot of possession against Wales. That is not going to be the case against England. It's going to be a different mindset on how the team approaches defending, and defending against a team that is significantly more explosive in possession than this Welsh side, that can beat you on the dribble. They can beat you over the top. And not only that, extremely dangerous off of set pieces as well. So multi-headed attack. Still, I think the U.S. has the players. They have the physicality to also hit England on the counterattack at times. I think if there was one little piece, one little Achilles heel on this English side, I think they can get at the defense when they're pushed up in possession if they make a poor pass. So, but it'll be a completely different look than we saw today. And in some ways, it's almost a little bit different than 2014. 2014, you get the 3 points against Ghana, then the point against Portugal, and you're like, okay, just don't get hammered by Germany, and you've got a really good chance of going through. So this is almost that little bit opposite. Instead of playing Germany in the last game, you're playing that team in the second game, and you're almost going, look, if you can steal a point, brilliant. But in the end, if you can keep that to 1-0 and then know you're going up against Iran, who has to play better than they did against England, and give yourself an opportunity in that last game. Now, by all means, don't be afraid of England. Don't go into the England game thinking, okay, just pack it in with 11 and because they're so much better than us. By no means, but definitely be a little bit more conservative in that match and make sure you don't do what Iran did. Concede that first goal, open yourself up, and before you know it, the game's away from you.
All right, there he is, Kasey Keller. Kasey, great to have you with us here on Futbol Americas, and Herc and I will see you in about 90 minutes on ESPNFC.
There
Thanks
we go.
again.
Sounds good. All right, guys.
There he is, Kasey Keller. What a ledge.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPNFC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.